one. Why are we afraid? I believe we did all the reflection questions, right? We talked.
Yeah.
We went through all the individual verses on page
Right.
20 and 21 and talked about, specific life examples of those. So I think we're up to the discuss
Yep.
section on page 22. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
All right. So it suggests we engage in a conversation
Page
about these
22.
questions. So, open-ended questions here. You may not be down to your final heartbeat, but you may be down to your last paycheck, solution, or thimble of each sunrise seems to bring fresh reasons for fear. Each of us can find reasons to be afraid, no matter how good our life is. No one is immune to fear. What causes your heartbeat to race, your palms to sweat? What makes you afraid? I don't have to dwell on this forever. I think it's just a matter of kind of getting a discussion going to talking about fears. But anybody want to share what kind of things give you?
Well, going to the dentist.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah, we know, Paul.
Every time you hear about it, sure. Yeah. What is it? But let's talk about that for just a second. What is it? The pain? Like, do you experience like real?
So I
Is it
do
pain?
experience, sometimes I experience real pain when they're getting the little needle thing and they're
Mhm.
scraping, especially when they scrape near the gum line.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when they're using the water pick and it's spraying in the between the teeth. And then the other thing is the unknown, like, oh, we found some. Have you come back and drill into them?
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's a good point. So the pain of past experience is part of what makes you afraid to go there, and the not knowing what might happen while you're there. Those kinds of fears can be applied to many things besides dentists, right? Who else? Anybody else?
I want to give you kind of the opposite. I don't fear, but I think it's because of the crazy life that I live, that I don't, but I do fear. I fear for my children, because I got 5 children and 9 grandchildren, none of them are saved. And that's my biggest fear. I pray every day. But you know what? My mother prayed for me for 30 years. Before she went home to be with the Lord, she said, there's hope. But I do worry about that all the time.
Right.
But God,
So you do, yeah. So some things scare you, not dentists and physical things like that, but
look who I've been through.
spiritual things. Oh, that's a whole other category, but it's certainly valid, right?
Sure.
Things to be afraid of. Yes. All right, so fear never wrote a symphony or a poem, negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith did that. People who refused to consult with or cower to their timidities did that. When, in your experience, has courage overcome fear to accomplish something good? Think of an example in your own life, or if you can't, maybe think of something from someone else's life that you could point to.
Well, again, I'll start with that one because when I first became a Christian back in 1984, I was afraid or embarrassed to talk to other people.
Okay.
I didn't know anything, and I didn't associate my terrible life with my testimony. And I used to just we can laugh about it, but I said, I stood to my gangster friends and I tell them, I have a Bible in my hand, you gotta listen to me. And I smacked it. I don't want nobody to go through what I went through. And I smacked it, they from another way. I said, if he lost his, he's done. He's out of here. They ran away. I used to have people partying at my house for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days at a time. Nobody's coming anymore because there was no more parties. And that's when I realized what my friends were. There wasn't many. But fear, I mean, not expressing yourself when God changed your life you have to, well, it's hard in the beginning because you don't know much. Not until I started learning the word of God that I understand. So what I was doing before, well, you know, 1984, I don't believe I was really saved. But I went through all the scenarios of being saved and not drinking, not drugging, but when things got tough, went back to where I needed money. I would do what I had to do. So I don't believe I was really saved, and nobody could believe me because they seen what I would do. And here I am telling them about Jesus. But meanwhile, I'm up in the mountains making drugs. You can't do both. You can't disgrace God. And I had to pay for it. You know, he said, I'm putting you away for 8 years. And my life finally changed. After knowing that my son Nicky was gonna be 21 years old when I got out of jail. And my whole life changed from that day. But that priest telling me that God knew what I was going to do before I did it.
Yeah, one of my situations is, when I was working at Rocking Horse Ranch for 18 years. 2009 came and economy crunch and parents were pulling their kids out and I was the first one let go. After 18 years at Rocking Horse Ranch, I wasn't a head teacher, I was a teacher assistant. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was let go. But it was like, I was fearful because I'm like, what am I gonna do now? I remember sitting in front of my computer and Paul standing behind me and I'm in tears and I'm saying, I have to write a resume. And I'm in my 50s. I have to write a resume. I have to start all over again. You know, and it was a rough time, you know, all that, but I vividly remember we were at Boulevard Church because we were on vacation at Harper's Ferry. And we had evening service. They called us to come forward if anybody had, and I went forward because I was really at my end of my rope. Like nobody was hiring. I'd call religiously every 3 times a week and all that. And I said, Lord, school's starting, the new school year's starting, and I have nowhere to go. And I just laid there and I just poured my heart out and prayed. And within a week, Kathy Jenkins took me to Holding Hands. So I could fill out a resume and there was like 15 people in the hall. And I couldn't find a place to sit to fill my thing out. But then 2 weeks later, I got the phone call and I went in for the interview and September 21st, I was hired and I've been there since 2009. And it's been a wonderful thing. It's been a good thing. And that was really like, what am I gonna do now? You know, the way the economy is and everything, but God got me through it. And that was where, you know, the courage, the spiritual courage to overcome that fear. And he answered the prayer and it was just in time, like the new year started and I had it back.
Yeah. God's never late, right?
I had a crazy, not crazy one, but when I was working at Capital One, I would have to sometimes work the evening shift as a manager. And I had these 2 girls. One girl is named Caitlin and the other one's Kristen or Christina. And Caitlin comes up to me and says, Joy, we just found out that Christina's father passed and she is not going to take it well. That was her best friend, like very close. And so here I am, like, what am I supposed to do? And so as soon as Christina had heard that her father passed, she left the building. She like walked in the parking lot. She's walking around the parking lot. It's my job as the manager to make sure my people are safe. And so I go out there and I'm like trying to talk to her, calm her down. And I didn't know what else to do. So I just kind of hugged her and held her and said, can I pray with you? And I just prayed and I don't even know what I said, but I did something and it was like an immediate like calmness. And I was talking to her and I was like, don't worry about going back to work. Just, you know, be safe. And Caitlin was like, I'll take her to my house. Like, I'll keep an eye on her, make sure she's okay. And she doesn't do anything crazy. But I just remember that was a very high stress, like, what am I supposed to do moment? And the only thing I knew to do was to just pray.
You did it.
And I don't even know what I said, but yeah, it was definitely fearful.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah.
That's great stuff.
Definitely. See
But
that?
doesn't the Bible say that fear is a sin?
Fear's not a sin.
It's what we've been talking about so far is that how
You respond.
you respond to your fear, what you do with your fear, because fear is something that comes upon you, and it's not a sin to have, like I think Rob gave the, example last week of anger. That's another, it's like an emotional thing, it's sort of a visceral response. You can't help but become angry when something happens, and it's what you do with
How you
that,
respond.
right? Jesus became angry,
Jesus was
so
afraid too.
it can't,
at the cross.
it can't be a
If
sin.
There's any other
Jesus
way.
was definitely afraid, right? There's no doubt about that. He was so terrified of what he was going to do as he sat there praying in the garden that he sweat blood.
He actually knew what was gonna happen to him though, too. He knew everything that was
And he
gonna
was
happen.
still afraid,
Still afraid.
right? So we can't say that fear is a sin,
Yeah.
for sure. It's what we do with our fear. What was Jesus's courage moment that overcame the fear? He said, God, if there's any other way,
Yeah.
I really don't feel like doing this. This scares me way too much, right? I mean, think about, he wasn't talking about the pain of crucifixion. He was talking about the eternal punishment of sin from every person who would ever believe and put their faith in him, poured on his shoulders all at once. So his fear wasn't just, this is gonna hurt. His fear was, I don't want to die millions of times over for all eternity for somebody else, for something I've never done. But what was the courage that overcame that fear?
Your will, not mine.
Your will, not mine. Exactly, 100%. That's exactly what he said, and that was the courage to
The
go.
Bible teaches that fear is a common human experience. Believers should overcome it through faith in God, who promises to be with them, strengthen them, and provide grace. Contrasting the spirit of timidity is the power of love and self-control God gives, and it gives key themes to the whole thing. But you're right. You're not human if you don't feel. You don't have something that, but God wants you to feel to come to him. He says, look, trust me. Cast all your cares upon
And
me.
so this whole
In fact,
series lesson
God even
about
says the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Yeah.
So if that was a sin, then that can't be accurate.
Of course, that's talking about
Yeah.
fear,
Oh, but
reverence,
still
fear and
fear.
all that, but still, yeah,
Yeah.
fear being
Difference of being
important
afraid.
to us as people.
Yeah,
Let's move on.
even take a look at like college campuses today, where, they shot Charlie Kirk, like they're trying to use fear as a catalyst to shut folks up.
Mm,
And us as Christians, we can say, hey, we're scared, but does that mean that I should take an action to shut up? No, not at all. But it's understandable why folks would take this.
And how many times does it say, do not be afraid?
365, one for every day.
Our next one. We hope for an easy ride through life once we meet Christ. Smooth sailing on a crystal clear sea, but storms rise up. None of us can escape this inevitable fact, whether we are Christ followers or not. It's not the absence of storms that sets us apart, it's whom we discover in the storm, an unstirred Christ. He handles our great quakings with a great calming. Describe a time when your life was in chaos, but you could clearly see that Jesus was unstirred by the storm. Example of that.
Yeah. When my life fell apart, when the judge gave me 8 years. And like I said, the only thing I ever thought about was Nikki gonna be 21 when I get out. And when I got into the jail, I asked the guard to get me a Bible. And when he handed me the Bible, he went and got me one, and he handed it to me in my hand, and all my fears come to calmness. And I just knew that whatever God's gonna do, whatever I've done, if I have to suffer for it, I gotta suffer for it, but I'm gonna follow you today. And it was from that day on, I never looked back. And then miracles happen, and most of you know the story, but it was because of my fear that, not for me, of what I did to my children and what I did to God. Because I did know the Bible in 1984, that I didn't follow it though, and I just didn't When I wanted to make money, I went and made money. Because I didn't want to lose my house. I didn't want to lose the cars. I didn't want to lose all that other stuff. But then I had to lose it all to gain it all. And which served my whole understanding about life. God controls it.
I have a little something, well, it's not little, but when Mackenzie was born. Now, before she was born, doctor, the ultrasound, the whole thing, everything was fine. Well, when she was born, Teresa said, Mom, all she's doing is crying, and they didn't know why. And they found out that she had an enlarged heart. And the hardest thing for that was to pray for somebody whose baby died to give her a heart. And we never thought and we were afraid of losing her. And when God gave her the heart, we were happy, very happy, and she's still with us today. And,
Amen.
that was hard, thinking that we were going to lose her like we did her brother, Johnny. But I just wanted to say that.
I just have a real quick one. Both my parents, both of them dying was really hard. But that peace that you get, and, I was 4 months pregnant with Joy when my father died. And that was hard because I had to keep myself calm, try to, get through this.
Yeah.
But there's that peace, that calm assurance. The Bible says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I definitely sensed his presence through all that. His peace,
I think this is a neat kind of visual that we can all keep in our minds whenever we go through troublesome times. The idea that when we call out to Jesus, we may be frantic and frightened and at the end of our rope. But when we call out to Jesus, we just need to listen for his voice, because it's not going to be frantic and crazy. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just going to be, I got this, you got this, here's how this is going to go. And then we're just going to, whether we have to go through it and it takes 8 years or however long, the storm isn't going to suddenly not be there anymore. But we can get through it because Jesus will be constantly, that will pass.
and he's calm.
And he will get us through. Because he's not stirred by it. He's sound asleep as the waves are crashing against the boat, because he's got, let's think about that for a second. Why was Jesus totally calm and not worried about the storm? But these disciples thought they were at death's door. This ship is being tossed all around. There's no way we're going to survive this. It was the biggest storm that Matthew had ever experienced. When he wrote it, he used that word that we talked about last week, seismos, meaning like it was just earth shattering. It was the worst storm ever. Why would Jesus be asleep? Why would he not, be as upset and afraid as the rest of the men in that?
Well, he was in charge of all the storms.
Yeah, that's exactly it. He has dominion over that. If he stands up and says, all right, knock it off, the whole storm just goes calm in the sea, right? So if we can call out to the God of all creation who has dominion over everything, if we just ask, then we can experience that I got this kind of calming presence and voice, right?
I was gonna think that it's not just that he could obviously, well, no, actually he couldn't, because he did nothing in his own power. Everything he did was through the Father.
True.
And I was thinking that that's what he was putting his trust in. I can go and take a nap because my Father is looking down on me and overseeing all of this. And he's not gonna let the storm destroy this boat that I'm in. I can take a nap.
Right. Good point. As the waves rocked and shook the boat, the disciples screamed, and Jesus dreamed. He rested his head not on a fluffy feather pillow, but on a leather sandbag, a ballast bag. This was a premeditated slumber. In full knowledge of the coming storm, Jesus decided it was siesta time. So he crawled to the corner, put his head on the pillow, and drifted into dreamland. Have you ever felt that Jesus was sleeping through the storms in your life? How did you respond? In anger, in frustration, in hurt, or with understanding? So first part of the question, has there ever been a time in your life that you're willing to share when you were going through some kind of stormy time and you felt like Jesus was sleeping through it? Okay.
I think the time with Nikki in the beginning parts, how rough it was, and I only know so much. I only know what my dad would tell me, but like the beginning of it has been rough, and it felt like Jesus was sleeping through it, and it was hard to. It was very hard to pray for her. I will admit it's still now very hard to pray for her. But I think that's something that I struggle with.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing that. Anything else, any other examples of that?
I was thinking with Caitlin, that whole thing, all that she was going through, and it was rough. It was really rough.
You didn't feel like I was sleeping through that though, did you?
No,
No.
but it was just a rough time.
Right,
We were just,
he's got this, but it was rough.
I think for me, when I don't know if you guys know this, but I was terminated from one of my jobs. I've never been terminated, and I feel like I work really hard. I'm not trying to be like prideful, but like I feel like I do a pretty decent job, and it literally blindsided me because there was no warning, there was nothing, and when I was sitting in the room and they were having the conversation of like, all right, we're gonna let you go today. I was like, why? Why am I being let go? And they could not give me an answer.
They still haven't.
There was HR sitting in the room and they're like, you're gonna need to call HR. I'm like, but they're sitting right here. Like, can you tell me? No, you're gonna have to call this number. I'm like, huh? So, it was very, very, very upsetting. But I mean, we obviously prayed about it, but I mean, God has me in a much better place now. I get to work from home, but in the moment, it was just like, what is going on? Where did this come from? So that was kind of crazy.
Maybe that's why you're not there anymore, is because God had a better
Yeah,
place.
it's like, I'm gonna take you out of that and I'm gonna put you here.
Yeah, you
It's
can
like,
look back
okay.
and see what God does and how he moves. But like in that moment, you're like, well, that's a question mark. Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
As we continue just on this particular question here about Jesus being asleep, let's remember that in the story that this is referring to, Jesus's sleeping was not a negative thing or a negligent thing, that's a better word. It was just he knew everything would be okay and he didn't have a reason to fear. And he knew that other people would be afraid, but he wanted to show them that they didn't have to be afraid. So his sleeping was not something, if the question is, have you ever felt that Jesus was sleeping while you were going through something? It doesn't necessarily have to mean, where are you, God? Help me out here, like it was for the disciples at that time. It could just mean, I believe that Jesus is calm through this. And so that gives me hope, that's a possibility, of getting through it in your own mind or whatever's going on in your life, because you're able to say, if Jesus is calm through all this, I can be too, if I just put my faith in him and try to be like he is.
But brother, too, that as we learn and read the Bible more, we learn that may your will be done. See, what God's will must be, if it's not his will, then we have to accept it. It could be a reason, maybe you're asking for something and he knows down the road you're gonna have an accident and die and don't put you there.
Right.
And then you won't know until that happens. How many times do we pray for people and they died anyway? That's God's will.
Right.
Not ours. So it's a tough thing unless you really understand where God's coming from.
Well, you just have to be careful with that because like Pastor Tom would say, there's three versions of God's will. It may not be necessarily God's, this is the will I want it to be.
Right.
This is the will I'm allowing. it to
Submissive,
be,
it's
and
submissive
the
will,
that I have to
submissive
be.
will.
Right.
Good stuff.
Does it bring you comfort to know that this reaction is intentional on his part? That's kind of going by what I was just saying, he's purposely resting calm, maybe, as an example, or as the calm person that we frantic and frightened people can come to for, that calmness that we need. Does it comfort you to know that his reaction is intentional, not accidental or ignorant? If not, how does it make you feel? So he wasn't asleep in a careless way. He, as Lucado is pointing out here, is sleeping on purpose. And then when the disciples have to wake him up and he goes, "What's the matter, guys?" And the boat's rocking and all crazy and they're all scrambling and terrified. And he just goes, "Oh, why do you have so little faith?" And he stands up and goes, "Enough." And then the water just calms right down. Does it bring you comfort to know that he went to sleep on purpose on that boat? And he'll remain calm and not get frantic and upset when we're going through some storm of life, some earth-shattering cycles in our own lives. I mean, it should, right? It should give us comfort to know that Jesus is not terrified. He's unstirred by the storm, the way he wrote here.
I would say that I would feel very disconcerted if Jesus woke up and he was terrified that the storm was going to.
That's like the pilot freaking out.
Yeah, you let your pilot just be like, "All right."
If they're upset, you're like, we're in trouble.
This wakes up, says, "Everybody jump!"
Yikes.
Oh, man.
All right.
He sits up in the heavens and laughs.
Yeah. All right, moving on then, with the discussion section. Fear feels dreadful. It sucks the life out of the soul, curls us into an embryonic state, and drains us dry of contentment. We become abandoned barns, rickety and tilting from the winds, a place where humanity used to eat, thrive, and find warmth, no longer. When fear shapes our lives, safety becomes our God. When safety becomes our God, we worship the risk-free life. Can the safety lover do anything great? Can the risk-averse accomplish noble deeds for God or for others? Think about the description of a fear-laden person as an abandoned barn. Give another illustration of how you feel when fear invades your life on a daily, even hourly basis.
I don't know about that sentence right there, but when you were reading that bottom part of the paragraph, I was thinking of Charlie Kirk and how he had more of a concern for the hearts of people than his safety. And he would get death threats and he would get threats, it's going to attack your family. And he's like, okay. And he still was, these people need to know Christ. They need to know the truth. And that is just courage. Didn't have, at least I don't think he had fear. I don't know, but.
Right, there's no way to know whether he was
Right.
afraid going places, but he took the courageous step of trusting God anyway, right? And that's what I think they're suggesting here. So, yeah, it's an odd little, Max Lucado is good at some kind of strange little, down home kind of example of like a barn,
Yeah.
farm and a barn, and using that as an analogy in his lessons. But the idea that a person who's full of fear is like an empty barn, an abandoned barn. There used to be important things happening in there, people, food and thriving, business and life was, kind of, the sort of thing that went on in a barn, and now none of that happens, because the barn is abandoned, because you've given over to fear instead of all of that life.
But what is fear gonna change? What is fear gonna change? You fear something and all you're doing is getting yourself.
Like, what good is it gonna do?
What good is it gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the point. Yeah.
Fear's more of an influence than like an action.
It stops them from doing something
Yeah.
stupid.
Well, that healthy fear, that's true, yeah.
On the rickety bridge, you're gonna fear, there's a high chance you might fall. You
True.
have to the bridge, you're not gonna go on the bridge.
Right.
Mhm.
I
That's
tried to
true.
climb up.
That's a
something.
kind of a different type of
Yeah,
fear, right? A
different
type
type
of
of fear,
fear,
yeah.
which we need to keep that
Be
in
careful.
mind.
We gotta be
Yeah,
careful.
absolutely.
Joy and I
Care,
did
caution.
a virtual reality date, and she went first, and it was they have you do VR, and they get you on a skyscraper, and there's a little plank like you're on a ship to jump. And I watched her fall, and she freaked out with VR, and then like my turn, so I get up to do it, and I peek my head out the door. I'm like, this is good. And like 2 minutes later, long story short, I was like, no, I'm not stepping out. I'm good.
It looks so real though. You like
Yeah.
look down, you're like, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
That's just that, I'm gonna die.
That's an interesting, safe way to
Yeah.
face fears, though, isn't it?
You ever wanna go like on a tightrope between
Yeah.
two skyscrapers, do it in VR.
Yeah, that's a good idea. But that kind of goes to what Mel was talking
Oh,
about. that
virtual,
kind of
virtual reality.
fear. It makes sense to fear falling off of a building,
Yeah.
right? Like, don't walk along the ledge of a building because, and so that's as Penelope said, a healthy fear, a fear that keeps you from doing something stupid.
Common sense.
We'll move on to that. Again, that little strange
Safely.
analogy there.
But think about it, it's our everyday life.
Yeah.
This is what goes through people's minds. Hey, it's something we need to know and how we need to combat it. How do we combat it through God's word?
Next question is about fear, that nature.
Okay, good. That usually happens. We end up discussing and it leads to the next thing. But all right, let's look at that then. To what extent is it okay to pay attention to concerns of safety? Describe the point at which sensible caution becomes worship of a risk-free life.
There you go, Penelope.
There
The rickety bridge.
So sensible caution, let's use Penelope's example of the rickety bridge. Sensible caution means if you see that bridge swaying in the wind or whatever, you don't try to drive across it, right? I don't think anybody would argue with that. It would just be stupid to do that, right? So let's keep with that exact example, rickety bridge example. At what point would that become as he's calling it, the worship of the risk-free life? If I refuse to drive over that bridge because I see how rickety it is, that's a healthy fear, a sensible, looking out for safety. At what point does that fear become something beyond and unhealthy for me? Something that is worshiping the risk-free life. Oh, I'm not gonna. It makes perfect sense to say I'm not gonna drive across that bridge, but anybody get what I'm going for here?
It's unhealthy. I'm not gonna leave my house.
All right, yeah, so
I
you
can't
take
get
it.
in a car, I can't get in anybody's car, they're gonna hit me.
I was gonna be a little more specific, sticking to the bridge thing, but exactly, going to that is I won't ever drive on any bridge anywhere I go. Now, I've just stuck myself in New Jersey forever. Right? I can't go over the bridge to Delaware, I can't go over the bridge to Pennsylvania.
Or New York.
Can't go on vacation,
Can't go to New York.
Right, so all of a sudden I'm stuck where I am. I might not be able to get, there might be a bridge between here and, Pittman or whatever, over 55. Oh, I can't drive over that because bridges are scary now, right? So at what point does does a healthy fear of something that makes sense become a fear that debilitates you and makes you worthless, makes your life
Let somebody else drive. Right now, you're sitting there with your eyes closed.
right?
There are a lot of people that fear going over
Comes and
bridges.
gets me.
Sure.
My sister does, my sister Becky,
Right,
fear going over the bridge.
right.
My
Any bridge.
principal
I
at
won't
my
At
school
one
is,
time.
no, my superintendent is afraid of going over bridges.
Huh? Bridges are a real thing. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was driving one time, well, I wasn't driving. A friend of mine was, we were in Maryland, and it's a very high bridge, the Bay Bridge in Maryland. And it was a beautiful day and everything, right in the middle of the day, and we're halfway up the bridge. And this guy just panics and stops the truck on the bridge, just stops and.
The one who was driving you.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
Oh.
We got stuck on that bridge too.
he just stopped and he couldn't drive. He was afraid,
Wow.
yeah.
What happened?
I said, move over, and I gotta,
Matter of fact, get out.
I almost threw him off the bridge.
Well, gee, now I know where his fear comes from.
Yeah.
Let's get you over quick.
What was the same bridge we were on? Didn't it like open?
I don't know if
I
it
think-
was road work or construction work, but yeah, we got stuck on that bridge too for like an hour and a half.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
were stuck at like the top
He
area.
was scared to
We
death.
never
to
guys
drive.
thought, yeah,
Carol.
yeah. And what I was thinking is, you know, that bridge that was hit by the ship and it collapsed at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
The one good thing about that is that it happened at 1 o'clock in the morning when there wasn't that many cars on the bridge. Unfortunately, the workers that were there were killed. But we went over that bridge many times with our motorhome because we couldn't go through the tunnel to go to Liberty. And I'm like, wow, how many times did we go over that bridge? You know, you just think in the past of what could have happened because of what happened on there, you know?
I was thinking of Moses, like, you know how he did not want to go and talk to Pharaoh because he was
Mhm.
afraid of what they could do, and God's like, you know, I created the voice, I created you, but he was terrified, and it took a long time to convince God to convince him to get him to go,
Right.
like to the point that God was really upset with him.
But how many times do we do that when God's like, I need you to go do X, Y, and Z? We're like, well, what about this? And what about that? And he's like, well, what about this? And what about that? And it's like, all right.
So in the spiritual sense, if we're, and I think that's why he gives uses this phrase, worship of the risk-free life. It's like,
Mm,
I'm just gonna be safe all the time. I'm just not gonna take any chances. The physical, almost kind of silly example of the bridge is like, I'm never driving over any bridge ever again. But a spiritual example, which is much more serious and maybe applicable to everybody's life, is, you know, you might be afraid to step out at the wrong time to witness or whatever.
yeah.
To stand up and just start shouting, you know, in the middle of a crowd. It makes sense to be afraid to do something like that because that probably is not going to do any good. But if that means I'm never going to, you know, witness to anybody because of that fear, you know, you mentioned the Charlie Kirk example, right? What if he decided, you know, what if the gunshot missed, right? And that just stopped everything. You know, I'm never taking this chance again. I got a wife to think about. I got kids. I'm not going to put myself in that dangerous position anymore. Then, you know, God wouldn't have been able to use him anymore because he wouldn't be willing to step out in faith ever.
Yeah.
He would be too concerned with keeping his life risk-free. And, you know, we're not all, you know, famous like that, where we can go to a college campus and have thousands of people either love or hate us. But every little thing that comes up in our life, if we're,
But there's consequences to everything. Look at Jonah, what I mentioned today. You know, he knew what kind of people they were, and then, but he didn't want to go there.
right,
And God said, go there, and he didn't go. And he wound up in the belly of a fish.
Right.
You know, it's, when God tells you to do something, you gotta do it, and or suffer the consequences. And
And there are gonna be consequences.
yeah.
yes, there are. Yes, there are.
Uh,
Bad the smell inside that fish. And not knowing you're gonna get out or not.
Hmm. The disciples on the storm-tossed boat on the Sea of Galilee marveled at Jesus' power. What kind of man is this? They thought. And likewise, I wondered at my dad's calm when the wolf man lurked behind the couch in my living room when I was 6 years old. A loving father, God, handles our great storms with great calm. In what ways have your encounters with fear increased your awe of God? Think about a time where there was a fearful situation. Maybe you were afraid at first, and then God brought you out of it, or maybe you faced it without fear because of him. But in that fearful situation, you couldn't help but think, wow, God is awesome.
Well, like I said before, when I was getting ready to go into my brain surgery to have them cut open my brain and pull that out, I had no fear at all that it wasn't gonna go well. I wasn't worried, that scared at all.
God gave you that peace that passes understanding. The peace that doesn't make sense.
How old were you with that fall?
I was 20, I think,
It was 2002, so you were 21.
20.
You just turned 21.
How old are you now, Paul? 40?
If you don't mind saying.
43.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, think about it for a second.
Try 24, Paul.
I know he's supposed to be 24.
Yeah.
44.
I don't really,
Oh, he's
it's not like when you're 7 years old, you're like, I'm gonna turn 8. And
Stop doing that at 40, don't you?
43. I remember you when you were 13. I came to the church.
I'm 44.
Wow.
Finally,
Easy to
the-
math.
I didn't know you were 4 years older than Nikki.
So anybody else have an encounter here that just kind of made you realize even more how awesome God is?
I remember at COVID when it was like beginning, it was no one knew what it was and it was like really scary. And I remember my family was so afraid because as you know, my dad's an EMT. Like he works with sick people all the time.
Yes,
I remember
yes.
he was so scared. I've never
Of
seen my
course,
dad
of
that
course.
scared before. And I remember crying and praying because I overheard them talking and I was so scared. But also through COVID, I believe that's when I started to become a lot more serious with my faith. That's when after that I joined FCA and I started making more plans for like Bible studies and stuff that I couldn't do until I could drive. But I started making more plans. I started getting more serious about this. So
That fear turned into something good.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah. Describe a time when Jesus spoke to the storm in your life and the winds calmed and the waves stilled. So kind of, a lot of these questions sort of repeat the same thought, but it's just another way of looking at it, another angle. Describe a time when Jesus spoke to the storm in your life. Remember, that's what he did. He didn't just say, guys, stop worrying, and the storm fizzled
No,
out.
no.
Stood up
Yep.
in the boat and he told the storm to
Mhm,
go away.
mhm.
He spoke to the storm and it went calm. So is there a time when you felt that you were going through a storm in your life and Jesus spoke to that storm and took it away, or took the consequence, the possible consequences away? Lesson consequences or whatever it was, got you through it.
Yeah. Went in front of that judge. I stood up and I said, Your Honor. Oh, he says to me, Mr. Curcio, what do you want me to do for you? I said, Your Honor, first of all, I want to apologize for this. Well, let me tell you the beginning of the story. I got locked up. And then I went in front of him and he gave me 3 years probation. He said, now I know you got a drug problem. He said, go get yourself straightened out. I said, okay, no problem. But God said no. I was back in front of this guy in a week. And the judge stood up, he said, well, you didn't listen to me. So now I'm gonna take care of you. If I take it back in 3 years, I'm gonna give you a 4 flat. And then and for this crime, I'm gonna give you 4 more than 8 years, your life should be straightened out. When I asked the guard to get me the Bible, sitting in my cell reading the Bible, I hear guys praying upstairs. I walk upstairs, there's a room full of guys praying. I say, hey guys, can I come in? He said, come on in, come in. Well, within probably 4 months, I'm running this Bible study. And a guy came in, his name was Frank. He had a tattoo of his son, a baby son, on his arm. And he said to me, Nick, you don't belong here. I said, well, that's great, Frank. I got 7 more years. I said, where do I belong? He said, you belong in this place called America's Keswick. I said, how do you expect me to go there? He said, fill out this application. I said, what am I gonna do? I got 7 more years, Frank. He said, fill out the application. I said, see it? I have him on my arm because I killed him. I was high one night smoking crack and he was in bed with me and I rolled on top of him and suffocated him. And I was in Keswick and I got kicked out. You belong in this place. I said, all right, I'll fill it out. I sent it in and lo and behold, I get a letter back that I have to be paroled. I called my friend up, my partner in my life. He was a lawyer. He became a lawyer. I said, Kenny, I need to be in this place. He said, what do you want me to do? I said, I don't know what you can do, but I can go to this place and if I get out of here. He said, all right, I'll put a motion for the judge to reconsider your sentence. So December 5th, December 15th, I got a letter back from the judge. I'll hear your case on January the 4th. Now, I don't know what's gonna go on. I just don't know. And I get in front of this judge, he said, what do you want me to do for you? I said, well, Your Honor, first I want to apologize for what I've done last year. I said, because I disrespected you. I said, but I really need to be in this place called America's Keswick. He said, Mr. Kershaw, let me tell you something. I'm very familiar with Christian drug programs. I have a long arrest record. And he says, I'm looking at your life here. And he says, I have a problem with you because I know how strict Christian drug programs are. He said, and you remind me of a guy that's gonna take orders from anybody. So you want to be right back in front of me again. I looked up in heaven. I said, Lord, it's up to you now. I'm not saying another word. I said enough. And in about 2 minutes, I'm just waiting for him to give me an answer. And he says to me, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take back the 8 years. I'm going to give you 5 years probation upon completing America's Keswick. If you don't complete America's Keswick, you're going to do 10 flat in Trenton State. Is that a deal? Well, it's going on 30 years now. So God answered. God changed his mind. Whatever he was thinking, he wasn't worried about. He knew I was the kind of guy that wasn't going to listen to anybody. And it happened.
Anybody else have an example of that?
I had a situation in my work when I first started working. The head of the tech department, we had a lot of techs. He was not a very nice guy. From the very beginning, when I got my job, I found out later from some other people that I went for the interview and he had me sit in the media center for 2.5 hours before the interview because he wanted to see how determined I was to get the job and if I would stay for the whole time or if I would just leave.
Wow.
I was tired of working at Radio Shack, so I was willing to stay to get out of it if that's all I had to do, but I didn't know that at the time. So then I went for the interview. And then about maybe a month later, we had meetings every week. So the meetings were like, I don't know, 8 o'clock. I was about to walk in at the meeting. I was about to walk in and it was 8:02. He said, it's 8 o'clock, you're late. And he slammed the door in my face and said, next time. So I'm like, okay, so I'm sitting in the side room while they're all in there in this meeting. And then other things came up and it looked like I wasn't gonna be working there long because of it just. But then he got fired because of what he was doing to people and he got let go. And then ever since then, everything has been easy.
Hmm.
And my whole stand was, I'm not gonna, if I get fired, it's gonna be because I did my job and I did everything to the best of my ability.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna be the kind of person that goes out and causes hostility. If I'm gonna get fired, it's gonna be because I did what was right and there's nothing more I could.
Not responding back in sin.
Right,
Mm.
Or benefit, retaliating.
Yeah.
right.
All right, let's look at the wrap up here. Over the course of the next week, remind yourself of God's track record in your life. And it suggests here journaling in the space provided at the times, about the times he has calmed the storms in your life. Something to think about. I certainly need to write it down, but just ponder that through the next week. When you find yourself struggling against fear, pull out this list. It's just in your head. Just remind yourself of those times and remind yourself that God is capable.
Mm,
And there's a memory verse on page 30 that goes along with this. Luke 12:32. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Amen. God really wants to give us all the good things that he had intended for us from the beginning of creation. That's his default setting. He wants to give us that.
Yeah.
He's not holding it back and like, you see if you can deserve this, right? I so want to give you everything I created for your benefit. I want to give you, happiness and it just eternal.
What a great dad we have.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. And so it is his good pleasure to give us
Yes,
good
it is.
things.
But he was not gonna give you nothing that you're not ready for.
Mhm.
Sometimes we ask him for things that he knows aren't right for us. He might give it just to show us how we weren't right for it. It's amazing. He's the greatest of the greatest.
There's a really good movie. Some folks have probably seen it, the movie Courageous, where he
yeah.
talks about like taking their fearfulness and then just being like a man of God and standing up, even in like the situation that would knock folks down. It's understood, it's recognized, but it doesn't deter up men being able to stand up for God. Really good movie.
Yeah. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this lesson, so I think we can probably
Thank you.
dismiss a couple of minutes early.
No,
I'm glad you were all able to share our first lesson.
yeah.
And I imagine Pastor Tom will be will be here next week. But certainly,
He's supposed to be
Anyone?
back next week, you said?
I would assume so. Janet said that he had planned to come today, but she said, I think you should probably just rest that. And he agreed.
Plus the
Yeah.
weather too.
Yeah, too many.
We should all knock on his door and ask where he was at.
Where were you?
Where were you?
Thanks, sir. You can't go to the ice cream.
Thanks,
Yeah, that's right.
Well, he was excused for sure.
Uh,
Doctor's note.